If I told you that the food on your plate, the way it's cooked, the spices used, even the timing of when you eat, can rewire your brain, would you keep listening? You should. Because cooking is far more than an art or a necessity for survival. It's one of the most neurologically enriching activities we can engage in. Every step, from chopping garlic to tasting broth, activates multiple systems in the brain, strengthens cognition, and even shapes our emotions, memory, and behavior. Today, we're diving deep into the science behind cooking and taste. You're not just going to learn how flavors work. You're going to understand how cooking changes your brain, influences your hormones, affects your microbiome, and ultimately determines how you feel mentally and physically. Let's start with what happens in the brain when you cook. Cooking isn't a passive task. It's a rich, coordinated neurological workout. When you plan a recipe, you activate your prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and executive control. As you chop, saute, or stir, the motor cortex and cerebellum manage fine muscle movements and timing. Your sensory systems, smell, sight, and touch, light up in parallel. This multisensory involvement increases brain plasticity, the ability of your brain to create new neural connections. Cooking, in that sense, is an effective cognitive enhancer. Repeating recipes or learning new ones can strengthen memory circuits, improve focus, and reduce cognitive decline, especially as we age. Now, let's zoom in on taste, one of the most misunderstood senses. Many people assume taste is all about what happens on the tongue. In reality, taste is a multiset brain process. Taste receptors on the tongue send signals to the gustatory cortex, but smell plays an even larger role. In fact, flavor, the full experience of what you're eating, is about 80% olfactory. The olfactory bulb, which processes scent, is located close to the limbic system, the seat of emotion and memory. That's why food is deeply emotional. A single bite of your grandmother's soup can bring back vivid childhood memories because your brain wires flavor with experience. Spices are not just there to make food interesting, they are pharmacological agents. Capsaicin in chili peppers binds to pain receptors and triggers the release of endorphins, your brain's natural painkillers. Turmeric's active compound, curcumin, can modulate inflammation in the brain and enhance mood by increasing levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a key molecule involved in learning and memory. Black pepper contains piperin, which not only boosts nutrient absorption, but also impacts neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. When you cook with spices, you're subtly altering your brain chemistry, improving your mood, boosting your alertness, or even helping your body cope with stress. And then there's fermentation, a process that's as biologically profound as it is delicious. Fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, and miso introduce beneficial bacteria into your digestive tract. These microbes don't just help break down food. They communicate with your brain through the gut-brain axis, particularly via the vagus nerve. The microbiome can influence your mood, memory, focus, and immune function. What you ferment and eat can help reduce symptoms of anxiety, depression, and brain fog. Cooking fermented foods isn't just good for digestion, it's an act of neurological self-care. Let's not forget the power of food in shaping memory. The hippocampus, the region of the brain responsible for memory consolidation, works closely with the olfactory system. That's why smell and taste are so powerful in triggering emotional memories. When you cook a meal for someone, you're not just feeding their body, you're embedding a moment into their memory bank. It's also why rituals like family dinners or cultural recipes are neurologically meaningful. They foster bonding and trigger the release of oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, which enhances trust and emotional connection. Now, here's a twist most people don't know. Your taste preferences change depending on the time of day. That's because taste is influenced by your circadian biology, your internal 24-hour clock. For example, research shows that people tend to perceive food as sweeter or saltier in the afternoon than in the morning. This means your enjoyment of food isn't static. It's governed by your biological rhythms. Cooking and eating at optimal times of the day can improve how your body processes nutrients, regulate your appetite hormones like leptin and ghrelin, and even help you sleep better. All of this brings us to a powerful truth. Cooking is one of the few daily practices that integrates the body, the brain, and the environment in a unified system of growth. It's sensory, emotional, and cognitive all at once. It's where science meets culture, biology meets ritual, and chemistry meets creativity. Understanding the science of cooking and taste doesn't just make you a better cook. It makes you more aware of your brain, your body, and your human experience. So the next time you step into the kitchen, remember, you're not just making dinner. You're reshaping your brain, tuning your nervous system, feeding your microbiome, and building emotional architecture through memory and sensory encoding. Cooking is not a mundane chore. It's neurobiology in action. And it's one of the most powerful tools you have to influence the quality of your life. Cooking may seem like a basic household task, but in reality, it's one of the most neurologically demanding activities we perform on a regular basis. When we engage in cooking, we're not just preparing food, we're engaging in a deeply integrative brain exercise that taps into sensory perception, motor coordination, memory, emotion, and executive functioning. From a neuroscience standpoint, cooking stimulates and strengthens brain circuits in a unique and multidimensional way. It requires us to plan, time, adjust, multitask, problem solve, and constantly integrate feedback from our senses, all of which engage distinct areas of the brain and promote neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout life. The process of cooking begins with the planning phase, where the prefrontal cortex becomes highly active. This region of the brain is responsible for organizing, sequencing actions, setting goals, and adapting strategies when things go off track. For example, if you're preparing a new recipe, you must consider ingredient substitutions, timing, heat levels, and the order in which steps need to occur. This demands working memory, which is the brain's ability to temporarily hold and manipulate information. It also activates your brain's attentional systems, which must filter out distractions and stay focused on the task, something that, when practiced regularly, can translate into improved focus in other areas of life. As you move into the physical preparation, slicing vegetables, kneading dough, stirring sauces, your brain transitions into motor control. Here, the motor cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia are engaged. The motor cortex coordinates the movement of your limbs, while the cerebellum ensures those movements are precise and balanced. The basal ganglia handle habitual movements, such as the muscle memory of how you instinctively crack an egg or flip a pancake. These systems are highly trainable, and the fine motor skills developed through regular cooking can have downstream benefits, especially in aging populations where maintaining dexterity and coordination becomes more important for overall brain health and independence. Simultaneously, the senses play a crucial role. Smell, taste, touch, hearing, and vision are constantly providing feedback that shapes decision-making during cooking. The olfactory bulb, which processes smell, is directly connected to the limbic system, the brain's emotional center, meaning that aromas can immediately affect mood, trigger memories, and influence appetite. The gustatory cortex processes taste, while the visual cortex interprets the changing colors of food as it cooks, signaling doneness or burning. Touch receptors in your fingers guide your sense of texture and firmness, which are essential in knowing when something is adequately mixed or cooked. The integration of all these sensory inputs requires the brain to perform real, time-cross modal processing, a sophisticated function that strengthens neural connectivity across different brain regions. Another often overlooked component is emotional regulation. Cooking can be inherently calming, activating the parasympathetic nervous system and reducing cortisol levels, especially when performed in a mindful way. At the same time, challenges that arise during cooking, a sauce breaking, an ingredient burning, or a timing misstep, present opportunities for resilience and adaptive thinking. The amygdala and anterior cingulate cortex are activated as you regulate emotional responses and recalibrate your actions under stress. This practice of facing micro challenges, staying calm, and creatively problem solving helps build emotional resilience over time, which is crucial for mental health. Memory also plays a fundamental role in cooking. The hippocampus is involved in remembering recipes, flavor combinations, and cooking techniques. Long-term memory retrieves old family recipes or childhood smells, while procedural memory helps you recall how to chop, saute, or fold ingredients efficiently. Over time, these memory circuits become more deeply encoded, especially when reinforced with emotional and sensory experiences, which is why many people can remember exactly how a dish should taste or smell decades after first encountering it. In total, the act of cooking is not only a nourishing experience for the body, but a form of active, layered cognitive stimulation that promotes brain flexibility, learning, and emotional balance. And that makes it one of the most accessible and effective forms of natural brain training available to us daily. Taste is one of the most complex sensory experiences the human brain can process, and it's far more intricate than simply detecting flavors on the tongue. In fact, what most people refer to as taste is a multifaceted integration of various sensory signals, including smell, texture, temperature, and even sound, all interpreted and synthesized by the brain to produce what we call flavor. Understanding the neuroscience of taste requires us to zoom out and look at how multiple regions of the brain are activated and interconnected when we eat. When food enters the mouth, taste buds on the tongue identify 5 primary taste qualities: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. These taste signals are transmitted via cranial nerves to the brainstem and then to the gustatory cortex, which is located in the insular cortex of the brain. But this is only the beginning. At the same time, the olfactory receptors in the nasal cavity send scent information to the olfactory bulb, which lies just above the nasal passages and has direct connections to the limbic system, particularly the amygdala and hippocampus, areas responsible for emotion and memory. That's why smell plays such a critical role in how we experience flavor, and it's also why people lose so much of their perception of taste when they have a cold or nasal congestion. The brain doesn't just process taste in isolation. It cross-references the incoming sensory information with memories and emotional states, modifying the experience in real time. If you've ever found a food delicious one day and repulsive another, that's your brain's interpretive system at work, altering perception based on internal states like stress, mood, or hormonal fluctuations. Your taste preferences are not fixed, they are shaped and reshaped by both your environment and your physiology. For example, stress can dull the sensitivity of taste receptors, while feelings of nostalgia or comfort can enhance flavor perception through emotional pathways. The brain is also constantly predicting and updating expectations. When you anticipate a food will taste good, dopamine is released in the striatum, a key reward center, even before the food touches your tongue. If the actual taste matches your expectation, dopamine levels remain elevated, reinforcing that food as pleasurable. If the taste fails to meet your expectations, dopamine levels drop, leading to a negative feedback loop that may cause you to avoid that food in the future. Moreover, taste sensitivity is genetically and neurologically individualized. Some people, known as supertasters, have a higher density of fungiform papillae, the structures on the tongue that contain taste buds. These individuals experience flavors, especially bitter ones, with greater intensity, which explains why certain vegetables like broccoli or arugula can be overwhelming for them. Beyond genetics, your brain's taste map is also conditioned through experience. Cultural exposure, dietary habits, and early childhood feeding patterns all influence which tastes become preferred and which are rejected. This process of taste memory, where the brain logs and categorizes flavor experiences, is tightly coupled with the hippocampus. Over time, the brain builds associations between flavors and context: sweet with comfort, salty with satisfaction, or sour with alertness. These associations become part of your neurological taste identity, and they can remain for life unless intentionally rewired through repeated exposure or conscious dietary change. Texture, temperature, and even sound further influence the brain's interpretation of taste. Crunchy foods, for example, activate auditory feedback that the brain interprets as freshness, while soft or mushy textures can signal spoilage or unfamiliarity. Temperature plays a dual role. Certain taste receptors respond more intensely when food is warm, while cold foods can numb sensitivity, subtly altering the flavor profile. All of this points to the fact that taste is a deeply integrated brain function, one that is emotional, sensory, and predictive. When you eat, you're not just feeding your stomach, you're feeding a network of neural pathways that shape your behaviors, preferences, and emotional responses in a way that is as much about the mind as it is about the body. When you add spices to food, you're not just enhancing flavor, you're activating a complex neurochemical cascade in your brain and body. Spices are powerful biochemical agents that directly influence neurotransmitter activity, pain receptors, reward pathways, and inflammatory responses. In fact, many of the compounds found in culinary spices act similarly to pharmacological drugs, except they're delivered naturally through your meals. The impact is immediate and long-lasting, and understanding how this works gives you the ability to use food as a tool for emotional regulation, cognitive enhancement, and even pain modulation. Take capsaicin, the active compound in chili peppers. When you consume something spicy, capsaicin binds to a receptor called TRPV1, a heat-sensitive receptor that is also activated by physical heat and inflammation. This binding sends a signal to the brain that mimics burning pain, even though no actual tissue damage is occurring. The brain, interpreting this as a mild threat, responds by releasing endorphins, your body's natural opioids. Endorphins are not only analgesic, meaning they reduce the perception of pain, but they also generate a mild sense of euphoria. That's why people often experience a spice high or even crave spicy foods despite the initial burn. Capsaicin also triggers a release of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. This means that spicy food doesn't just challenge the palate. It stimulates the reward centers of the brain in a way that reinforces the behavior and makes it more likely to be repeated. Another potent compound is curcumin, the bioactive component of turmeric. Curcumin has been shown in numerous studies to cross the blood-brain barrier, which means it can directly influence brain function. One of its most studied effects is on inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation in the brain is associated with depression, cognitive decline, and neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's disease. Curcumin acts as a natural anti-inflammatory by downregulating inflammatory cytokines and upregulating antioxidant defenses. It also appears to increase levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, a protein that supports the growth, maintenance, and survival of neurons. Higher levels of BDNF are associated with improved learning, memory, and emotional stability. In this way, turmeric isn't just a flavor. It's a neuroprotective agent that has real, measurable effects on brain health. Black pepper contains a lesser known but equally powerful compound called piperine. Piperine does two things that make it uniquely important. First, it enhances the bioavailability of other compounds, particularly curcumin, by inhibiting certain enzymes that would normally break them down too quickly. This means pairing turmeric with black pepper dramatically increases its effectiveness. Second, piperine has its own neurological effects. It has been shown to modulate levels of serotonin and dopamine, which are crucial for mood regulation, attention, and motivation. In animal studies, piperine has demonstrated antidepressant-like effects by increasing the activity of monoamines, the neurotransmitters involved in mood and arousal. While more research in humans is still ongoing, the preliminary evidence is strong enough to support the idea that spices like black pepper can influence your brain chemistry in meaningful ways. Cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, and nutmeg also contain essential oils and active compounds that interact with the central nervous system. For example, cinnamaldehyde, found in cinnamon, has been shown to reduce blood sugar levels and improve insulin sensitivity, which has indirect effects on brain function by stabilizing energy supply. Eugenol, found in cloves, has mild sedative and analgesic effects. These compounds engage with receptors in both the brain and the gut, triggering changes in perception, emotion, and physiological balance. The more diverse the spices in your diet, the wider the range of neurological effects you're likely to experience. These effects are not just temporary. Regular exposure to bioactive spices can result in long-term changes in neuroplasticity, receptor sensitivity, and behavioral reinforcement. They influence not only how your brain processes taste, but also how it regulates mood, responds to stress, and processes reward. That means your spice rack is quite literally a toolbox for brain health, not because it makes food more exciting, but because it makes your brain more responsive, more resilient, and more adaptable. The relationship between your gut and your brain is not just symbolic, it's biological, direct, and profoundly impactful. This is known as the gut-brain axis, a bidirectional communication network linking the central nervous system with the enteric nervous system, which governs the gastrointestinal tract. This axis involves neural pathways, particularly the vagus nerve, as well as immune signals, hormones, and metabolites produced by gut microbes. When you eat fermented foods, you're introducing living organisms, probiotics, into your digestive system. These microbes are not passive passengers. They interact with your intestinal lining, communicate chemically with the brain, and play a major role in regulating inflammation, mood, cognition, and overall neurological function. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of cooking, the conscious cultivation of foods that nourish not only your body but your brain by targeting your microbiome. Fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, kefir, and yogurt are rich in live cultures of beneficial bacteria such as lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. These bacteria produce neurotransmitters and neuromodulators like GABA, serotonin, dopamine, and short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs, that directly influence brain activity. For example, serotonin, commonly referred to as the feel-good neurotransmitter, is often thought to be manufactured in the brain, but in reality, more than 90% of your body's serotonin is produced in the gut. The bacteria in your digestive tract influence how much serotonin is produced, how it's transported, and how your body responds to it. This means the emotional stability and psychological resilience you experience on a daily basis are intimately tied to the health of your gut and, by extension, the foods you feed it. Fermentation also alters the chemical composition of food in ways that make nutrients more bioavailable. Complex compounds are broken down into simpler forms that are easier for the body to absorb. For example, fermentation can reduce antinutrients like phytic acid in grains and legumes, which would otherwise block the absorption of minerals like zinc and magnesium, both of which are crucial for brain health and neurotransmitter function. In this way, fermented foods serve as both a delivery system for beneficial microbes and a method for enhancing the nutritional quality of a meal. From a neurological perspective, the brain receives a clearer, more balanced signal when nutrient absorption is optimized, leading to better cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and even improved sleep patterns. Moreover, the communication from the gut to the brain is not limited to good news. When the gut is out of balance, a condition known as dysbiosis, the brain often suffers as a result. Dysbiosis has been linked to mood disorders such as anxiety and depression, cognitive decline, and even neuroinflammatory conditions like Parkinson's disease. The presence or absence of specific bacterial strains can influence the expression of inflammatory cytokines, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and trigger neuroinflammation. Cooking and consuming fermented foods can help restore microbial balance, reduce systemic inflammation, and signal safety to the brain, which in turn can downregulate the body's stress response. This is critical because chronic stress itself can damage the gut lining, reduce microbial diversity, and perpetuate a negative feedback loop that affects both physical and mental health. It's also important to understand the behavioral aspect of fermented food consumption. Fermentation often involves waiting, observation, and patience, psychological traits that mirror neurological benefits. Preparing fermented foods creates a ritual around nourishment, one that aligns with slower, more intentional living. The anticipation of a fermenting dish ready to be eaten can activate the dopaminergic reward system in a way similar to cooking a favorite meal. These foods don't just feed the gut, they engage the brain in a loop of sensory, emotional, and biological feedback. The moment you consume something like kimchi or kombucha, you are not just tasting a sharp tang or fizz. You're triggering a biological conversation between the food, your gut, and your brain that influences everything from your immune response to your emotional clarity. When you taste something unforgettable, your grandmother's soup, a dish from a childhood celebration, or even the first bite of a new cuisine while traveling, what's happening is not just a moment of pleasure, but a powerful neurological encoding event. Flavor has a uniquely intimate connection with memory because of the architecture of the brain itself. Unlike other sensory pathways, the olfactory system, which processes smell, a primary component of flavor, bypasses the brain's sensory relay center, the thalamus, and connects directly to the limbic system, particularly the amygdala and hippocampus. These are the brain's primary hubs for emotion and memory formation. This direct access means flavor experiences are often processed with heightened emotional significance and stored in long-term memory with greater permanence. That's why certain smells and tastes can bring back memories with stunning clarity, sometimes decades later, and why food memories are often among the most emotionally charged we possess. The experience of flavor is multisensory, combining taste, smell, texture, temperature, and even the visual presentation of the food. But the olfactory component is by far the most dominant. In fact, up to 80% of what we perceive as taste is actually smell. As we chew, volatile aromatic molecules travel up from the back of the mouth to the olfactory receptors in the nasal cavity through a process known as retronasal olfaction. These signals are sent to the olfactory bulb and then immediately routed to the hippocampus, which encodes them as part of a memory trace. This connection between flavor and memory is not merely descriptive, it's structural, biological, and active. It means every meal you eat has the potential to influence not just your short-term satisfaction, but your long-term cognitive map of emotional experiences. Consider how a single flavor can transport you through time. The taste of cinnamon might remind you of winter holidays, or the smell of grilling onions might bring you back to late summer family barbecues. These aren't just psychological associations, they're embedded neural pathways being reactivated. The hippocampus, which consolidates new memories, works in tandem with the amygdala to associate those memories with emotional states. This is why foods that comfort us are often the ones we had during safe, nurturing moments in our past. It's also why flavor aversions can form quickly and last for years. If you became ill after eating something, even if it wasn't the food that caused the sickness, your brain encodes that flavor with danger. This survival mechanism was evolutionarily protective, but today manifests as a deep subconscious influence over our food behaviors. The act of cooking and serving food for others also plays into this flavor memory loop. When we prepare a meal and share it with someone, especially in emotionally meaningful settings, we create multisensory memories tied to connection, love, or care. This is because oxytocin, a hormone associated with social bonding, is often released during shared meals and emotional exchanges. The brain essentially tags that moment, associating the flavors with trust, comfort, or celebration. This memory can later be reactivated simply by smelling or tasting that same food, reigniting the original emotional state. In other words, food becomes a neural bridge, connecting people, emotions, and experiences across time. Even the repetition of certain flavor profiles across cultures and families creates a kind of sensory identity, a set of encoded preferences and memories that become part of how the brain defines home, safety, or joy. This also explains why flavor is so central to cultural traditions and why recipes are passed down generationally with such reverence. They are more than instructions for nourishment. They are blueprints for emotional continuity. The brain, ever attentive to sensory input, uses the flavor memory system as a way to anchor identity, regulate emotion, and preserve meaning. Each meal then is not only an opportunity to fuel the body, but also a profound chance to reinforce and retrieve the memories that shape who we are. Most people think taste is static, that your preferences for sweet, salty, bitter, or umami are simply a matter of personal choice or cultural conditioning. But the truth is, your experience of taste is dynamically regulated by your body's internal clock, known as the circadian rhythm. This 24-hour biological cycle, which governs sleep, hormone production, metabolism, and alertness, also plays a significant role in how the brain perceives and responds to flavor. In other words, the same food eaten at different times of day can actually taste and feel different in the body, because the brain is interpreting the input through a constantly shifting neurochemical and hormonal lens. Understanding this connection between timing and taste can transform how we cook, when we eat, and how we optimize our meals for better mental and physical performance. Circadian rhythms are controlled by a master clock in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, located in the hypothalamus. This master clock synchronizes the rhythms of various systems throughout the body, including those in the digestive tract and the brain's taste centers. These rhythms influence the expression of genes in taste receptor cells, alter levels of appetite-related hormones like ghrelin and leptin, and shift neurotransmitter sensitivity in response to food. Research has shown that sensitivity to sweetness and saltiness tends to be higher in the afternoon and evening, while bitterness is perceived more strongly in the morning. That means your brain's subjective experience of food is not only dependent on the food itself, but also the biological context in which you consume it. A cookie might taste more satisfying after lunch than first thing in the morning, and a bitter herbal tea might feel more intense before breakfast than at night, not because the ingredients changed, but because your brain's perception system did. This has major implications for both appetite regulation and cognitive performance. Eating during your circadian peak, when your metabolic and neurological systems are most active, can lead to better digestion, more stable blood sugar, and improved cognitive clarity. On the other hand, eating when your body is winding down for rest can blunt flavor sensitivity and disrupt hormonal rhythms, particularly melatonin production, which is critical for quality sleep. For example, consuming high sugar or high fat foods late at night not only affects sleep latency, but also blunts the brain's reward response to those foods, leading to an unsatisfying eating experience and an increased likelihood of overeating in search of a dopamine spike that the brain isn't primed to deliver. This is why late night snacking is often emotionally driven but rarely physiologically satisfying. The circadian system also plays a role in meal anticipation. Your brain begins preparing the digestive system for food based on routine. This is why regular meal times can improve digestion and energy, while irregular eating can confuse hormonal signaling and lead to erratic hunger or bloating. At the same time, the anticipation of eating, especially if it's a familiar or pleasurable meal, triggers a dopamine response even before the first bite. This anticipatory reward system is strongest when it aligns with your internal biological rhythms, meaning the psychological and physiological enjoyment of food is greatest when you eat at the right time of day. Additionally, the composition of your meals, not just their timing, can influence your circadian biology in return. Foods rich in protein and complex carbohydrates earlier in the day support dopamine and acetylcholine production, promoting alertness, focus, and motivation. In contrast, meals that are higher in healthy fats and calming compounds like tryptophan, found in foods like turkey, oats, and fermented dairy, can support the production of serotonin and melatonin, helping you transition into restful states in the evening. Cooking with this knowledge becomes a form of neurobiological precision. You're not just feeding hunger, you're orchestrating chemical balance in alignment with your body's timekeeping systems. Ultimately, the way the brain processes flavor is inseparable from the timing of the experience. Your biology is not just passive in the face of food, it is actively shaping your perception of it, determining how satisfying, pleasurable, or even memorable a meal becomes. Every meal you prepare is a dialogue between the chemistry of the food and the rhythms of your body, and understanding this interplay allows you to harness cooking as a means of biological alignment. The brain is listening not just to what you eat, but to when you eat it, and it responds accordingly with changes in taste perception, mood regulation, energy levels, and long-term health outcomes. So now we understand cooking is not just an act of nourishment, it's a deeply neurological, chemical, and emotional experience that reshapes us with every bite. The brain doesn't passively receive food, it interacts with it. Cooking engages your prefrontal cortex, strengthens your motor coordination, and activates the emotional memory systems that link flavors with lived experiences. Taste isn't confined to the tongue, it's a full brain experience, dynamically shaped by time, biology, and emotion. Spices are not just ingredients, they're neurochemical tools. Fermentation isn't just preservation, it's a method of direct communication with the brain through the gut. And flavor, far beyond just pleasure, encodes memory and emotional states in ways that shape who we are and how we relate to others. When we align cooking with our circadian rhythms, when we understand the timing and biological feedback of taste, and when we deliberately choose ingredients that influence our mood, cognition, and gut-brain connection, we begin to see that cooking is one of the most underutilized forms of brain optimization and emotional regulation available to us. Each meal becomes a moment to train focus, enhance neuroplasticity, balance neurotransmitters, and deepen emotional memory, all through simple, intentional acts in the kitchen. The kitchen is not a distraction from science or performance. It is science in action. It is neurobiology made tangible. And by stepping into it with awareness, you're not just cooking better meals, you're quite literally shaping a better brain, a more balanced mood, and a sharper, more resilient mind. So the next time you prepare a dish, remember, you're not just feeding your body, you're building your brain.